All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to End of Mission, the podcast where we talk about space missions that have ended. This is the intro I thought of.
Okay, cool, nice. I like it.
Yeah. Okay,
Uh, okay, who are you?
we'll get to that. I am Paul, the pressure-fed astronaut. And who are you?
Oh, I'm Face of Sarcasm.
Okay. And we're going where every mid to late 20s white guy has gone before, which is starting a podcast where we talk about things.
Yep, living the dream.
Yep.
I'm assuming, given the images of the space shuttle and the fact that you're an aerospace engineer and that we've been talking about doing this podcast for well over a couple of months now, I'm pretty sure we're talking about space missions
Oh,
and the space shuttle. At least specifically this episode.
yes.
We're talking about the space shuttle.
Yeah. You can see it. There's an image of it right there. We're looking at one. You know what's funny? That's not actually launching. That's the static fire.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. All right.
Yep. Okay, so why are we doing a podcast, Face of Sarcasm? Wait, I should start.
Yeah. Why? Yeah. Why are we doing? I'm the one asking the questions here. Why are we doing a podcast? Pressure fed astronaut.
Okay, well, so for me, I complain about spaceflight enthusiasts all the time, not knowing things about spaceflight. And
Okay.
I'm not a hypocrite, so I've decided I'm going to teach you all about spaceflight. We're going to talk about space shuttle missions and space probes so we can learn about them, what happens on these missions, and demystify space travel a bit. And build
Okay.
an appreciation for it. What else did I write on the slide?
God. I think that's fine. We don't have to read through.
No, I'm reading this. The other one is this is easier to do than a video with my face in it.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. I am the I am the character that the audience vicariously follows along this journey. I'm the fish out of water that asks a bunch of stupid questions in order to try and have at least a basic understanding of what is happening with space travel.
The non-technical person.
Yeah, my background is in industrial design, which has absolutely nothing to do with building rockets.
But you did
So,
build these slides, and they do look very nice.
yeah, I built the slides. You populated them with this nonsense.
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
All right. So the general goal of the podcast is we're to learn about the space shuttle and space exploration missions in detail, right? It's not just, hey, this person went to space. What did they do in space? Hey, this space probe went somewhere. What did we learn with it? What was on it? What worked and what didn't? That sort of thing.
Yeah, the nerd stuff.
Yeah, the dumb nerd stuff. And again, I want to demystify space travel because
Okay.
I guess I want to rain on people's parades.
Okay.
Yeah. So for our first episode, we're not actually talking about a specific space shuttle mission. As the title says, we're talking about canceled space shuttle missions before 1986. But before we get there, we have to ask ourselves an important question.
Which is,
What is the space shuttle?
oh, okay. Well, it's the big white thing that you're showing a picture of, right?
Yes.
Yay.
Yep. Okay, we're done. That's good.
All right. But wait a minute. Why is the space shuttle?
Well, that's a good question. So we can start this question more broadly as a now what? Right? Apollo 11, July 1969, man walks on the moon. The dream of Kennedy has been achieved.
Mm-hmm.
Now what do you
Okay.
do?
Do a few more of those? Just
Well,
keep
that's
doing the same?
Well, yeah, that's kind of in there. But you also have to remember at this time, there's a new president. His name is Richard Milhouse Nixon, and he's not Lyndon B. Johnson, and he's not JFK.
Okay.
He's also not a Democrat. He's a Republican.
All right.
Now, the original plan for the space program envisioned under LBJ was once we're running Apollo, we just keep using Apollo hardware, right? Saturn V's, Saturn 1's, Apollo capsules, lunar modules, and we just kind of keep going. We push that to the next guy, right?
Okay. So like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Just
Exactly.
keep going.
Kind of what the Soviets did. They're still flying Soyuz.
Okay.
which was built in 1967.
Oh, okay.
Right, so just keep doing that.
Just keep doing the same.
The problem is that Apollo 1 happens, which
What
kind
happens
of
with Apollo 1?
a crew dies on the pad during a fire because of design flaws in the Block 1 Apollo capsule.
Yeah, that would change.
Now,
That would change things.
Congress wanted to kind of punish NASA for this, but they couldn't get rid of Kennedy's dream because that's 1967, right? We're still waiting for the landing, but they need to do it somewhere. And one of the things that was going to be an outgrowth of Apollo was eventually called Apollo applications. You have a Saturn V, you have Saturn 1B, you could put stuff into low Earth orbit, like really big payloads, like, I don't know, a giant space station. And you could put Apollos up to it. Because that was kind of the original vision for the Apollo program, was first to go to low Earth orbit, and then eventually go to the moon. But then Kennedy had to say, no, we're going to go to the moon by the end of the decade, because he speaks with a weird Boston accent.
Don't think that's Boston, but whatever.
Isn't it?
No.
Is New England?
No, I'm pretty sure it's not New England.
I thought it was a weird New England accent.
Who cares?
I don't know. Well, I care. So
we're not accent analysts or experts.
Today on
We're nerds.
Today on End of Language. So as I put in the slide, I should read that. And also, just want to make a quick note here. This is a very abridged version. If you really want a good detail on this, David S. of Portree's blog really goes over this. And then there's a book called The Space Shuttle Decision that I read through to discuss this, to do my research. So just so we're clear, this isn't going to be detailed, because if we really wanted to, we could do a podcast covering how the space shuttle became what it is from about 1967 all the way to April 12th, 1981. And that's all we could do, and that'd be really boring unless you like technical details and meetings.
I love those things. We should do it.
My 7th favorite thing in the world. So you use Saturn drives, space stations, you go there, Apollo 1 happens, and then Johnson also starts scaling back the Apollo program. We stop Saturn V production, so we'll only ever get 15 of them, and we end up with, I forgot how many Saturn 1Bs.
A similar amount, right?
Yeah, about that, because there's 2 left. Well, there's going to be 1 left once the one at the Welcome Center in Alabama gets torn down.
Oof.
Yeah. So, that kind of limits your program. So that kind of a scale back of Apollo applications. Limited to Skylab and then what would become ASTP. There were plans for things like the Apollo telescope mount. So what they do is they take a lunar module and transform it into a telescope to look at the sun. The descent stage would have all of its guts ripped out, and they'd put like astronomy equipment in there to look at the sun. And then the lunar module ascent stage would be stripped out and have analysis equipment in there. Now, this became the telescope mount on Skylab.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So there's this big scale back of the program. And then now you have Nixon walking in as the president. And he's a new president, new administration. He wants to do his own space program. What's he going to do? Now, Marshall wants to do more Apollo. Keep going. We got money. We can build all these grand things. That's what this big picture is of what's called the Integrated Program Plan. We've gone to the moon. We're going to keep going to the moon. And then we're going to go to Mars. So
just like a continued expansion of Apollo equipment.
Yep. So we developed things like space station modules, right? Big space station modules would be launched on a Saturn V. And that's what we'd be seeing a transference of. Saturn V would launch all these big, heavy things like the nuclear shuttles, the space tugs, and the space stations. And the crew of these space stations and logistics for them, along with some other payloads, will be launched on this thing called a Space Shuttle.
Okay.
Yep.
So it's basically just one piece of this larger ecosystem.
Yep. So Nixon formed the Space Task Group to kind of come up with his plans for the space program. Tom Paine, no relation to the founding father, comes with 3 budgets for this integrated program plan. So one is called austere. So that's $4 billion a year in $1970 annually, and they'd go to Mars eventually. You'd build up all this stuff, but Mars is not in the picture. It's more of a someone else can take care of this problem.
Yeah, an eventuality.
Yeah, we'll get that. We'll get there. And then there's the intermediate program, which is $5 to $6 billion per year, with getting to Mars as early as 1986.
Whoa.
Right, because you gotta build a space shuttle, and I think by 1975 you gotta keep doing NERVA to build a nuclear shuttle, and the Mars mission itself will be made of three nuclear shuttles strapped together. A big space station module to act as the habitat, and then a Apollo capsule shaped lander for Mars. If you've read Stephen Baxter's Voyage, this is pretty much what happened in the book, except in the book it's an all-chemical way of going without nuclear propulsion.
Okay, so that's intermediate.
Yep, and then the Vigorous would be $7 billion per year, and then eventually you'd switch over to $8 to $10 billion a year, and you'd be on Mars by 1981. Within a decade. So that's
very vigorous. Okay.
Yeah.
So clearly they went with that one, right?
Yes, obviously. Nixon, the Republican, who's got Vietnam, and kind of the end of kind of the LBJ Democrat big programs like the Great Society, I think it was. And you got Vietnam, which costs a lot of money, and then the public's not as interested in space anymore. At this point, I think over 50% of the public says that Apollo was too expensive. The other thing to remember is that Nixon's vice president is Spiro Agnew, and he's a big space nut. He wants to keep doing all this stuff. He wants to go to Mars, but the problem is Nixon wants to cut budgets. He's a Republican. He's more of a modern Republican, right? Like a 50s Ike Republican's a bit different than the one what we see now. Yeah, the one we see now. So the administration comes back and says, You're not getting all that money. What are you talking about? We have Vietnam. Okay? So they say your budget is going to be $3.5 billion per year at maximum.
So it's not even austere.
Correct. So now there's three options Nixon is presented with. Option one is round out the rest of the Apollo program with 6 more crewed missions to the moon, do Skylab, and then put funding into the integrated program plan Space Shuttle and Space Station to be built and flown by about 1979. So that's the Space Shuttle and then the low Earth orbit space station. And I gotta remind you, integrated program plan had a lot of space stations. They loved them. You can see them here, right? You got one in low Earth orbit, you got one in polar orbit, one in geostationary orbit, one around the moon. They would land them on the moon.
So, like, a lot.
A lot of space stations. Jeez. And they're also like Skylab-sized space stations. I actually found the slides for the original presentation on this. They're talking about having, I think, 48 people on the moon in the 80s.
Whoa.
Yeah.
And the size could support that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So they put a bunch of these little surface stations down.
So they basically just fly them out there with these nuclear shuttles and put them down there, and they'd have almost 50 people in them. Yep.
Well, excuse me. The whole space station would have 50 people in it. So they'd land a whole bunch of these modules.
Okay, so there'd be a bunch of these different modules that would all have the people.
Yeah, they'd all be kind of lined up next to each other. They'd be a little village. They'll have a little white picket fence.
Little American flag, yeah.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah.
Play, lunar basketball with a boy outside.
Well, baseball. Okay, this is America.
What did I say?
You said basketball.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Basketball's American.
That is true. So option one sounds kind of familiar. The second option is, okay, you round out Apollo. You fire off the rest of the Apollo capsules, the rest of Saturn V, Saturn 1s. You do build the space station, but instead you use the Gemini capsule, a modified version of it called Big G, and fly it on a Titan III rocket.
Okay.
Yep. Air Force was interested in using Gemini. We'll talk about this, I think, in the next slide. But that's not right. The Titans are less expensive than Saturn 1s.
How much so?
About half for the same payload.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it makes sense then. Switch over to them.
Or he's got option 3. Apollo 14 and then just give up.
Oh. Jeez. So it's just like, we're done.
Yep. Just end human spaceflight. Keep doing like robotic probes, but end human spaceflight.
Man.
Now, Nixon's in an interesting position with this. He obviously can't afford to do big expansionist space programs because no one's interested. The budget's not there. He's got Vietnam. He's got his own personal agenda. The guy who started these programs beat him in the presidential election, so there's a bit of a sore spot there. But he also can't give up human spaceflight because the Soviets are still doing this. And we're still in the middle of the Cold War. So we got to do this.
Yeah, that's not ending for a hot minute.
Yeah. So Nixon goes with option 1. Round out the Apollo program, do Skylab, and then start putting money into this space shuttle concept and a space station.
So what I wanted to ask is, like, okay, it seems like he's trying to basically shut down as much human spaceflight as possible. So why continue to, like, build a new space shuttle and space station? Why continue with that concept?
Well, he's still interested in this. It's still, again, it's a representation of American prestige and what you can do. The idea behind the space shuttle, which we'll talk about next, is that it's about the economic side of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Apollo Saturn is a very expensive system to run and fly. So
okay,
yeah.
So this would be like a newer one that's, like, less expensive.
Yeah, So okay, so this is the birth of the Space Transportation System, STS. Now, if you read the Space Shuttle decision, you discover that people did not want to fund this thing.
Oh.
It did not pass through Congress a lot. There's a lot of budget cuts. People weren't interested. You had people like Bill Proxmire who said, this is nutty stuff. You're not going to do this. Stop doing it. Space is useless. Stop doing this.
Jeez.
Yes. He's from Wisconsin, right? You know who held his seat before him?
Who?
Joseph McCarthy.
Oh.
Yeah. Right, so they've got a lot of opponents in Congress because people aren't interested in the space program, kind of the big defense spending, that sort of thing. But there's still kind of that nostalgia, the kind of, we should do more space development. It's a symbol of American prowess. And so to save the space transportation system, this would mean cutting Apollo 18 and 19.
So it just ends at 17 as opposed to continuing at 18, 19.
So technically it was actually Apollo 17 that they killed because if you read Last Man on the Moon by Gene Cernan, the original crew was Gene Cernan, Ron Evans, and then Joe Engle. Mm-hmm. But then Harrison Schmitt put up a stink and said, wait, you're not putting a geologist on the moon on your last moon flight? So they bumped him up and kicked Joe Engle off.
That sucks.
Yes.
It's like, you're one of the last people to go to the moon. Yeah, never mind.
No, you're
We're
not.
replacing you with a geologist.
Yeah, a nerd.
Those rock people.
Yeah, a nerd, especially a rock type. Ooh.
Ugh, the worst kind.
Yeah. Now, Apollo 20, the 15th Saturn V, had already been scrapped to free up a Saturn V for Skylab. Okay. And the other thing that was canned was NERVA, so the nuclear space shuttle was out. They cut that, they gutted it. No more funding for that.
Okay.
Because, right, we're not going to Mars anymore, so you don't need this thing. We're not going back to the moon. Eventually, we might come back to it.
Right.
And eventually, they cut the space station out of the shuttle program. The place where it's supposed to go.
They're just trying to cut as much of this thing as possible.
We still need a space program, but we're not going to have too much of one. Now, but the big selling point for keeping the space shuttle was that you could reuse it. Reusing this expensive space hardware meant it would hopefully cost less.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Again, think of it this way, right? F1 J2s, those are really expensive pieces of hardware. And where are they going? In the drink. Yeah, they're going in the drink. So the idea is, well, these things are pretty robust anyway. You can fire them. You could dunk them. Von Braun did some testing to reuse redstone and to test the H1 engine on Saturn 1. They dunked them in seawater to simulate landings, brought them out, and fired them again. So the idea is, use it again. You can, somehow. Right? There's different ways of reuse. Obviously, SpaceX is using partial reuse with the Falcon 9 first stage. In this case, the space shuttle was, as you see in this picture, 2 space planes on top of each other. The one option was to convert an S-1C into a giant aircraft to put wings on it.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, and put like 12 jet engines to fly it back. Yeah,
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
it is. The
Okay.
problem is you'd have to rebuild the S1C.
Yeah.
There's an
Might
alternate.
as well just get a new craft at that point.
Yeah, there's an alternate history called, I think, Right Side Up, that has this as the basis of STS, or it's it's a modified S1C with a S4B on top.
Ah,
It's really interesting.
okay.
But yeah, so the idea is you'd make space travel more economic by reusing the hardware and flying it again, right? The one that keeps going is, like an airplane, right? Which is a bad analogy if you ask me, because airplanes aren't beholden to the rocket equation. But that's just me.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Oh, hey, look, that's what my next thing says. So reusability is a selling point, right? So one, your current expendable launch vehicles are very expensive, especially ones that are human rated, right? The Saturn 1B was 2 times as expensive as the Titan 3C for pretty much the same payload.
Right.
So why are you doing this?
Yeah, why do the Saturn
Yeah.
1B when you could just do 2 Titan 3s?
Yeah. And the other thing is, there were low-cost Saturn studies. This is where some of the original big dumb boosters show up. They were all fine and dandy to replace the first stage with a big pressure fed or a big solid, until everyone went, yeah, but the S4B is really expensive, though. That's the expensive part.
Oh, so it's not even the first stage; it's the second stage that's the expensive part.
Yeah, which should make sense, because it's got to operate in space.
Yeah, the challenging environment.
Yeah, the extreme environment. You got to do propellant management. You got to turn the engines on and off again. So that's a bit of an issue.
Yeah.
So the idea here is build a fully reusable system with 2 stages, right? You can fly them back because they're like airplanes, right? It's easy. You can glide them. 2, right? If you want to do a big space program like going to Mars, you have to assemble this massive Mars spaceship. You need a large number of launches. Well, if your rockets cost $2 billion per launch, you need like 20 launches. It's never going to be inexpensive. So if you reuse it, you could theoretically do this. You could run it.
That'll lower the cost because, hey, you're reusing it. Don't have to rebuild it every time.
Yeah, and that's the third point I made, which is, you're building expensive hardware and you're throwing it in the drink. Why do that? Bring it back. Now, I, as a big dumb booster guy, say, don't throw expensive things in the ocean. But that's just me. Also, you can reuse big pressure feds as well. I mean, Bob Truax proved that, but
what if I want to throw, like, a diamond into the ocean because I met someone back in 1912 who I met for 4 days and then inadvertently got killed? Can I throw expensive things in the ocean then?
Sure.
Cool.
I mean, it's your prerogative, I guess. I don't know why you're going back to 1912 to romance people, but okay.
Don't shame me.
Okay. So, the Space Shuttle has been saved by Congress. Eventually.
Right. Saved, yeah.
Yep.
That's the word I'd use to describe this.
It's saved. Hey, there's no Space Shuttle slander on this show, okay? None of that.
All right.
Space Shuttle's cool. It's elegant. It's nice. Sure, it didn't live up to all of its expectations and goals, but it still flew. It still got the human spaceflight presence for about 30 years. It became kind of the face of the space program. Every time you think of NASA, you think the Space Shuttle now.
Yeah, that's true.
So no Space Shuttle slander here.
Okay.
Now, NASA is now working with the Air Force because they say, hey, we can launch your payloads for you. We want to launch everyone's payloads. We're going to do everything with this fully reusable system because it'll be so cost effective. And they say, okay, we'll do this. So the Space Shuttle's design actually ends up becoming kind of a Titan 3D surrogate in terms of size and payload capacity. Well,
How did that happen?
It was supposed to be able to fit one of DoD's payloads on it. One of the classified ones.
Ooh.
Yep.
Best kind.
Yep. And it was meant for a growth option for, right, it's going to fly in 1979, so, right, what are the payloads going to realistically look like in 1979? We'll launch
Futuristic.
Yeah.
Holographic. Yeah. Jetpacks.
Yep. In 1979.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's the future
Absolutely.
for you.
That's the future.
Yep. Where's my hoverboard?
Yeah, come on.
Gosh. So, now NASA issues a request for proposals. Pretty much NASA says, hey, we're building this new thing. Here's what we want you to build. So they give it to Boeing, they give it to Lockheed, they give it to Martin, to all the contractors, and say, sell us your system. Here's what we want. What are you going to give us?
Okay, so basically they're pitching the concept to all these different companies, and then they're competing to propose their own system.
Yep, they're bidding on it, basically.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have to ask ourselves now, how do we get to a space plane?
Yeah.
It's a good question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Why do we arrive here? And
why not like a space car or a space bus or a space train?
I think
plane?
I think in Portuguese, the space shuttle is actually translated to the space bus.
Well.
Kind of works.
Yeah. I mean, like airport shuttle is a bus.
That's true. So, like all modern rocketry, we can trace the origins of spaceplane development to Nazi Germany in the 1930s.
Right.
So there's a bunch of rocket hobbyists going around. These guys would strap rockets to their cars, they'd strap rockets to gliders, and then they'd blow themselves up and die.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
That sounds a great source of entertainment.
Yeah, the public would go watch. Some of them would make it too. Yeah. So the first real space plane is Eugene Sanger's Silbervogel, Silver Bird, which is a contender for what's called the America bomber, developed by the Luftwaffe for Nazi Germany. The idea is to build a rocket space plane to bomb the United States from Germany.
Okay.
Yes. Not a smart idea. The real attempt at one was the first picture, the black and white one, is a V2 with wings on it. So V2, of course, is one of the first ever real serious ballistic missiles ever used in warfare that ended up killing more people building it than actually in combat. Because it was built during the Holocaust using prisoners.
Oh.
Yeah. And so the problem is the V2 has a certain range to hit London. And now, Germany was losing World War II when they were implementing V2, which means their borders were shrinking because the Allies were pushing in.
So the enemy's just getting closer, so the range doesn't matter as much, right?
Well, you want to demoralize London. How do you send a V2 to London when it's out of your range?
With a rocket?
With the rocket, but out of the V2 range. You put wings on it, you go up, and then it glides in. That didn't work.
Oh.
They launched it and the wing fell off. And then they gave up.
Well, crap, that didn't work.
Yeah. Missed. So, now, America actually, one of our first missiles, the Navajo, we saw it when we went there in 2017. It was one that blew over.
Okay.
It was one of our first missiles, and it used wings. It'd actually be launched up and glide in. So the first real space plane built was in the North American X-15, which is serious space plane development because we're doing high altitude research, we're trying to get to the edge of space. Actually, the first flight of the X-15 technically went into space.
Whoa, cool.
Yes. Yeah, it made it above 100 kilometers, and it was reusable, except the one that crashed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that one crashed. One of them crashed. Neil Armstrong is actually an X-15 pilot. And nice. Joe Engle.
Okay.
Yep. He was the guy who was bumped off Apollo 17.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I already forgot.
You have the memory of a guppy. This is great. So the idea behind these is you want to do like hypersonic bombers. Again, kind of like the Silbervogel, right? You want to get this thing up, flying fast, you could drop bombs on people. This is before we realized that ICBMs were better. Or at least right around the same time we realized, wait, ICBMs can do the same job.
Yeah, what's with all this wing business?
Yeah. Now, the Air Force also started working on the X-20 Dyna-Soar, the dynamic soaring vehicle, spaceplane, which would launch on a Titan and do reconnaissance flights. It might go to orbit, maybe go pick up a satellite and service it. But if you can see the picture of it there, the concept art. It was really tiny, And at the same time, the Gemini capsule was flying and can do basically the same thing that they were talking about. So the Air Force said, we'll just use Gemini.
Yeah, why bother with this when you just use the same thing?
Yeah, it was really cramped, kind of hard to use, but we had a lot of space plane development. Okay. And NASA itself was working with lifting body aircraft at the same time. So lifting bodies are the weird-looking ones, like wedge-shaped, like the X-33 Venture Star, right? Mm-hmm. That's a lifting body because it's not right. Wings generate lift, but so do the airframes too, just differently. So the idea was to build kind of a big fuselage airframe thing and fly that around to do.
So basically, make the fuselage a wing-ish.
Yeah, kind of lifting bodies, just weird shapes that could generate lift. So now we have space stations, right? We want to build space stations, right? You go into space, what are you going to do up there? Now, in 1953, von Braun wrote a nice full article in Collier's magazine called Man Will Conquer Space Soon. Okay. And in that showed this rocket, the Ferry rocket, a 3-stage, fully reusable system that would launch astronauts up to this giant wheel space station, where their job would be to replace vacuum tubes on the radar equipment.
Cutting edge.
Oh, yes. Advanced technology. So, just so we're clear, the propellants on the big Ferry rocket, that's nitric acid and that's hydrazine. This thing is as big as the Saturn V.
Oh, man. Okay.
Jeez. Yeah. So the idea is, right, you could build a big space station, crews would do things on it, right? It eventually just becomes science and like crystal growth experiments, different science experiments and all that fun stuff. But the Air Force was interested in this for reconnaissance under the Manned Orbiting Laboratory, MOL, program, which would use the Titan III to launch crews up on a Gemini capsule to do reconnaissance. Well, in this case, science. I'm using air quotes.
Right, because reconnaissance being to take pictures of Soviet missiles and stuff.
Soviet things, yeah. And they did one test launch of MOL, which is the picture here.
Okay.
And this is actually, the Gemini capsule on top is the first reused spacecraft ever. Because
really?
It flew on Gemini 2.
Oh.
And we've seen it. It was a Gemini capsule at the Air Force Museum at Cape Canaveral.
Nice.
Yep, that's it. That's when they had a hole in the back of the heat shield because the crew had to get into the space station part back here.
Okay.
And how do you do that? Through a hole in the back.
Cut a hole in the heat shield, the part that keeps you alive when you're going through the atmosphere.
Yep.
Yeah.
They tested that. It worked. You saw the capsule. It worked.
Clearly it worked, yeah.
Yeah. So they would, and this would be built on a Titan 3M, so it's a modified version of the Titan 3, but it looked pretty much like this.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually a lot of this was declassified a few years ago. So there's pictures of mock-ups of MOL with like spacesuits and control equipment. Now, NASA was interested in MOL, but then they said, that's too small. So they didn't use it.
It's too small. Screw it. We're not doing it at all.
Yeah. Also, at this point, the Air Force realized that you don't really need people to operate your spacecraft. We could just take pictures and send them down on little capsules.
Oh, so just spy satellites.
Yeah. We really didn't need to use crews in space for that sort of thing. At this rate, by the time we had built a space station, vacuum tubes had been outmoded. By the time von Braun had proposed his space stations, vacuum tubes had been outmoded for the stuff that he was talking about.
Wow.
So,
technology moves fast.
It does, especially in this time period.
Yeah.
But that's where this kind of comes from. The idea is you can fly it around like a plane, but could also go into space. And then where you're going in space, a space station, right? It's a place to stay. It's an outpost to do science.
Right. Science. Wink, wink. Nudge, nudge. Air quotes. Spy on the Soviets.
And interestingly enough, had MOL flown, we'd have had our first African-American astronaut in about 1970.
Really?
Yes.
Who was it? Who would have gone?
I forgot his name. We'll talk about him when we cover STS-8.
Okay.
But he died in 1967 in a plane crash.
Ugh.
Unfortunate.
That is very unfortunate. Oh, man, that sucks.
Yeah. And actually, the cancellation of MOL freed up some astronauts who would then join the Apollo program and then eventually fly the space shuttle, like Bob Crippen, who flew on STS-1.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, it's
nice.
interesting. Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
That is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is a very abridged version of history. Now, there's a bunch of different proposals on how to build the space shuttle. A lot of different ideas. A lot of different people. A lot of studies going on. And now, don't get me wrong. There are plenty of studies that were happening before the space shuttle was ever decided upon. It was just, this is when it started crystallizing.
Okay, all right. It's getting refined down to like,
Yes.
what are we actually going to be building?
Yep. What do we want this thing to do? So how do you build it? So here's what the design target was. It has to have 1,100 nautical miles of cross range because the Air Force wants to launch from Vandenberg to borrow Soviet satellites.
Okay.
Right, so they go into a polar orbit, pick up a satellite, and come back down. At that point, the Earth would have rotated about 1,000 miles. They'd have to fly back.
Okay.
Right? So that's how it ended up getting the Delta wing we see now. The payload bay has to be 15 by 60 feet, so much bigger than the Titan III payload bay, or payload fairing, to fit the big DoD payloads, especially as they were growing, and could carry 65,000 pounds to low Earth orbit and 40,000 pounds to a low polar orbit. So these are our DoD satellites again for reconnaissance. Now,
Okay.
Okay, so just in reality, it only carried about 60.6 thousand pounds to low Earth orbit and never went to low polar orbit because it was too heavy by the time it was built.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it fell a little shy of its targets.
Yeah, we'll talk about this when we talk about canceled space shuttle missions after Challenger, but one of the upgrade paths for the shuttle was to build composite SRBs instead of using steel. The problem is, you had Challenger, and then the way that composite SRBs attached, because they're still segmented, also failed.
Oh.
Yeah, the part that failed on the normal SRB also failed on the composite one. That inspires a lot of confidence, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really drives fills your progress with purpose.
Yeah. The astronauts would love that.
Yeah.
And this idea of having a reusable first stage made a new friend called the Office of Management and Budget, which said, "You're not building a first stage that's reusable. What's wrong with you? We don't have the money for this."
Oh.
Yeah. You couldn't afford it. Because you think about it, right? You're building a giant aircraft that's also a launch vehicle. It's just, you start running the numbers, you go, oh my gosh, this thing's expensive. Especially since the space shuttle has to carry all these heavy payloads into space and be this big.
Yeah, do all these things for the Air Force.
Yeah. So the space shuttle then started to take a partially reusable shape. Now, the plan was eventually to upgrade it to use different, to actually be fully reusable, but the funds never materialized. They figured, okay, we'll get it low cost enough here. It'll save a lot of money in the space program. That way we can build the upgrades, right? We'll save so much money. We'll make it even more inexpensive.
Right.
As we all know, that happened.
Yes. Yeah, that sounds like that happened. Yeah.
Yeah, it did. So the first plan for first stage reuse, there was a few trade studies. I found them. They didn't have any good concept art, so I didn't include these for what the first stage would be. Now, the scariest looking one was called Saturn Shuttle, which would be an S1C first stage, and then an external tank and the shuttle mounted to the side of that. On top, like on the side, high up.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. That sounds like a good design.
That's a very safe design.
Yeah.
There were studies of big pressure-fed boosters to loft it up, and they could be sea recovered too, but they eventually went with solids because there's plenty of experience with solids already with like Titan III, and we had the AJ260 that was fired before, so we could build big solids. And the first stage then became the external tank plus the SRBs, which would feed these new engines called the SSMEs.
Which stands for?
Space Shuttle Main Engine. The final design is one orbiter built by North American Rockwell. Two solid rocket booters. I spelled that wrong. Wonderful. By Thiokol. 1 external tank built by Martin Marietta, and then 3 SSMEs built by Rocketdyne.
Okay, so there's 4 companies that are building the various components of the space shuttle.
Yep. Contracted out. Now, Rockwell is now Boeing. Thiokol is now Northrop Grumman. Martin Marietta is now Lockheed Martin. That's the Martin. And then Rocketdyne, I think, is still its own thing. Yeah, they're still their own thing, but they're trying to... I think Lockheed tried to buy them out recently, and it didn't work.
Okay.
So, there's some economic analysis about the space shuttle now that we kind of have a rough system. At what point will it break even and be cost effective? One option says 736 launches between 1978 and 1990, not 1980. That would be really fast.
Yeah.
Another typo. Excellent work, me. If you look at the slide, it says...
I see it. I see it. I'm following along.
Yeah, at 57 launches per year for the shuttle to be economic. Then another analysis says, oh, no. 506 flights, or 39 per year.
Just crank them out.
Yeah, that's easy and doable.
It's about once every 10 days. You could do that, right?
57 per year is
a little over 1 a week.
Yeah. Actually, SpaceX is hitting about 1 launch every 4.2 days on Falcon 9. Now, now we gotta remember that number is artificially inflated by Starlink launches, but yeah, you can do it. Just not the space shuttle. At its peak, the space shuttle launched 9 times a year. In 1985, and then I think in 1998.
Yeah.
Which is about what they could do with that standing army.
So a little under 1 a month.
Yeah. You got 10,000 people. You got to take every tile off and inspect it. You got to get the engines out to inspect them. Got to go fish the boosters out. It ended up being a bit more expensive than they thought.
Yeah, that's a miracle that they could do it. Once, 9 times a year.
According to Mike Mullane's autobiography, Riding Rockets, in 1985, NASA was really strained at hitting that flight rate. Yeah, pretty much it'd be a shuttle lands, they haul it in, take everything they need out, and put on the next one.
Oh,
yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah, they would cannibalize them for other parts to get the next one ready to launch. Everyone was working around the clock. Everyone was burning out.
It sounds like a disaster is inevitable at that point.
Yeah. Kind of. Well, that did happen in 1986.
Yeah, it was doing subtle foreshadowing there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, we're not going to cover Challenger or Columbia anytime soon. Just so we're clear.
Yeah.
So, despite all this economic analysis, all these weird things, the space shuttle goes from concept art like this to being a real thing. Now, the original 1977 launch date was never going to happen. They started building it in, I think, 1974. I am missing... No, I'm not missing a slide. But this is the original goal. So they start launching in 1979, right? They knew the delays were going to happen. So these are the first 23 missions of the space shuttle that were going to happen. Now, those of you listening are going to say, this is just from the Wikipedia page. It kind of is. This is from one publicly sourced document that everyone quotes. It's basically verbatim from that document. It's all publicly available. If you go to the Wikipedia page for ISEE3, it's basically the same as the NASA page for it because it's publicly available information. Okay. Also, David S. of Portree did a write-up on this too. These are my sources, just so we're clear. So, STS-1, the first flight, would be Columbia in June 1979. This would be the big orbital flight test. Right.
Can it make it to orbit?
Yes. Can it make it to orbit with all of its engines running?
Okay.
I'm throwing shade at Starship.
Oh yeah, because they blew up.
Yeah. So then, next month, July 1979 would be STS-2. This would be the second orbital test flight. Now, the plan was to do a Skylab reboost, so they could use that as the space station. The problem is that Skylab fell out of the sky in 1977, and it was damaged on liftoff, so
That was just never going to happen.
Yeah, not the best option.
It basically junk at that point. It's not even in orbit up there,
Yeah.
so what's the point?
Yeah, our first shuttle mission's going to Australia. Why are we going there?
God, is it a prisoner? Did we commit a felony?
Yeah. So this one eventually then became a test of the remote manipulator arm, the Canadarm thing, just to kind of test, hey, can you make this thing wiggle about? Does this work? Now, all these flights would have 2 crew on them, commander and pilot, because it's test missions.
Right, okay.
Right, and these did happen. This is pretty much what STS-1 and STS-2 did.
Oh, okay.
So then STS-3 would be Columbia in September 1979. This would be the 3rd orbital test. This one would test the arm, and they do some orbital maneuvering. So they'd fire up the OMS thrusters, these guys in the back, to change orbits, right? One of the goals of the shuttle is to go service satellites, to go deploy them, so you got to be able to move to different orbits. So this is to prove this actually works.
Okay.
And then STS-4 is also Columbia, December 1979. It's, for what it sounds like, it's basically the same mission as STS-3.
Testing that orbital maneuvering capabilities.
Yep, and wiggling the arm around, waving at people, I guess.
Yeah, waving at the Soviets.
Yeah. And then STS-5 would be Columbia, fly in February 1980. It'd be another flight test, but this time they'd carry mission specialists. Now,
Okay.
One of the ideas behind the space shuttle was you can carry 7 people to orbit, right?
Okay.
Apollo could carry 3. So you're stuck with fighter pilots. They're flying this, right? You got the commander of the mission, which is a fighter pilot. You got the pilot of the command module, which is a fighter pilot. And you got the lunar module pilot, which is a fighter pilot. Right? Only one scientist flew into space this entire program for Apollo. With the space shuttle, now you only need a pilot, a commander, and then a pilot. They would do all the flying, and then you would have mission specialists. So these 2 guys would fly the space shuttle and, you know, drink and do whatever the pilots do. You know, they wear the aviators and just be cool. Yeah. And you'd have mission specialists who would operate the experiments, deploy the satellites, and they'd do all these, fun things in space and make fun of the pilots, I guess. But not too much, because,
Yeah, it's like, we're taking you home, buddy.
Yeah. Don't make me turn this thing around. So that's what you'd fly on those missions. So you don't need people who could fly aircraft, right? You just put people in the space shuttle. Because again, you want to build civilian access to space. This wants to be your space truck. This is how you're going to go to space from now until whenever.
Right, it was shuttling mission specialists and equipment and all that fun stuff.
A bigger, better space program. Right? Now, then you have STS-6, which is also Columbia. There's a lot of Columbia missions.
Yeah, the whole thing's Columbia, I see.
Yes, it's all Columbia. So this one would include an EVA.
Which means?
Extravehicular activity. A guy would get on a spacesuit and go outside and wave at the pilots and clean the windshield from bugs.
Ah, okay.
Yep, because, hey, again, you want to serve a spacecraft in the space shuttle payload bay, you got to go out and fix it.
Yeah, so you got to go outside.
You got to go outside.
You got to test that spacewalk.
Yep, and this one would include test payloads for it. That's what the documentation says. We don't really know what that means. So maybe a test satellite or like some science experiments, something along those lines.
So after 5 flights on the 6th one, we'd finally be bringing stuff into space.
Yes. Well, again, it's a conservative development program.
Right. Okay.
Right. You gotta get this thing, walk this thing through the paces, make sure it works. Again, it's like an aircraft. By the time, like the 747 comes onto service, it's already flown quite a lot because they've had to test this thing to prove it works in a whole bunch of conditions.
Okay.
Right. So then STS-7 in May 1980. You notice there's a lot of flights.
Yeah, it's about 1 a month.
Yeah. That never happened.
Yeah.
So this would be the first operational flight, and it would deploy this thing called the Long Duration Exposure Facility. So it's this payload. It actually did fly, where it's a payload with a bunch of different things on the surface, like materials and equipment, that you just put in space for however long to see what happened to it.
Just see what happens to it. Okay.
Yeah, they just put it lower Earth orbit.
It's going to corrode from the UVs or get hit by micrometeorites.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a neat system. And then STS-8 would be in July 1980. This would deploy TDRS-A and then SBS-A. So TDRS would be NASA's new tracking data relay satellites. They'll be up in geostationary orbit. It's a way so you don't have to have ground stations, at least as many ground stations. Get rid of tracking ships. Right, so you can have constant contact with the crew on the space shuttle without having loss of signal.
Okay.
Still use it to this day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we launched. When was the last one launched? It was a few years ago. Yeah, and I think SBS was a commercial satellite.
Okay.
This isn't very refined. When we do actual individual missions per episode, I'll obviously talk about the spacecraft in detail.
Right.
Because these are just...
Right now, this is kind of like a brief history of...
Yeah. And these did fly. Eventually. Yeah. Good. Like STS-1 happened. Obviously.
Yeah.
So then STS-9, Columbia, would fly in August of 1980 and deploy GOES-4 and Onyx-C1. So GOES-4 is the geostationary environmental satellite.
Okay.
You know in Twister, when in the beginning, you remember the movie Twister, right?
Yeah, obviously I remember the movie Twister.
And they show the satellite above the storms?
Yeah.
That's GOES.
Oh.
Oriented the wrong way and in the wrong orbit in the movie. But that's what that is.
So just sitting up there in geostationary orbit, just like monitoring the environment. And weather.
Yeah, there's also POES, which they're in polar orbits. You can actually download images from them.
Oh, cool.
By yourself. I'm going to do that sometime.
Do it on stream. Do it on a live stream.
Well, I have to build the antenna first, but...
Build it on a live stream.
There we go. I'll do that. You can learn new swear words from me.
Oh, that would be fun.
That would be really fun.
It's like working with Dad all over again.
Exactly. And then ONIC were the Canadian geostationary communication satellites. ONIC means brother in Inuit.
Oh, okay.
I think that's what it is. Yeah. And STS-10 would fly in November 1980, which would deploy TDRS-B and SBS-B to geostationary orbit. Now, TDRS-B was the one that flew on Challenger, to kind of give you a scale of what happened to the schedule of the shuttle.
Okay.
So it goes from 1980 to 1986. It's about a 5-year delay.
Or a 6-year delay.
Well, it's close. Well, November, it's January.
Oh, okay.
It's not that long, right?
Yeah, that's 5.
I think GOES-4 would launch in, I think, October 1980 on a Delta.
So it still launched around that time, but on a different...
On an expendable rocket that was lower cost.
Got it.
Yeah. So STS-11, this would launch in December 1980 and carry this thing called Space Lab. It's a collaboration with ESA, because the space shuttle is also a flying space station, because we already scrapped that. So what we do is we put pretty much a research module, what I'm circling right now, in the payload bay, called Space Lab. Now, Space Lab would be either a pressurized module that astronauts could go in, or unpressurized modules of just experiments that you could put in the shuttle, in the cargo hold, and do science. It's a really neat system.
Yeah, wow.
So this would carry, I think, the pressurized Space Lab. And it'd carry European astronauts as part of the deal, which we still do this today, right? The Canadian going to the moon on Artemis 2 is the Canadians built the third remote manipulator system. It's going on Gateway. And as a result, they get to put a Canadian to the moon.
Ah,
yeah.
Nice.
And also they supplied like 87 metric tons of syrup for astronauts to consume.
Ah, yeah. That kind of buys their way in to all these space missions.
Yeah, the syrup launch system.
Yeah.
So then we have STS-12 flying in January of 1981, which would either launch Onyx-C2 and TDRS-C or just Intelsat 5.
Okay.
It's either of those.
Either both of those two or just
one.
Intelsat. Okay.
Yep. They launch it from the payload bay, go to geostationary orbit.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, but that's pretty ambitious, right? Trying to launch about once every month or 2 months and have 12 within about 2 years. That's pretty ambitious.
All right. So this is lovely concept art, by the way, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's beautiful.
I love this concept art.
So cool.
So then we have another set of missions. So 13 to 23. So STS-13 would be Columbia in March 1981, which would deploy GOES-E and then an Opportunity payload, right? The shuttle can carry like 60,000 pounds to low Earth orbit, and the GOES-E plus its upper stage is, 10,000 pounds. So there's plenty of room to carry more payloads.
Yeah.
Yeah. So STS-14 would fly in April 1981 and do a Space Lab mission.
Okay.
Yep. STS-15 would fly in May of 1981. It would deploy TDRS-D and SBS-C or Onyx C3. So it would be TDRS plus Onyx.
Okay.
So, in real life, of course, the shuttle launches in April 1981. So
this is when it would... So it's 14 missions behind.
Yeah. STS-16 would be also Columbia, fly in June 1981 and do the Space Lab 3 mission, which would be another pressurized mission.
Right.
And then STS-17 would happen. And that would be the first flight of Enterprise, which had been converted from the test article into a flying operational space shuttle, which would which would deploy Intelsat 5 and then recover the long duration exposure facility.
I see, like how all those materials reacted to space.
Yep, you can bring it back down and take a look at it.
Take some very small pictures of it.
Yeah.
Wow.
So this is when Enterprise would enter service. You have two shuttles flying now.
Yeah, Columbia and Enterprise, not just Columbia.
Yep. So then, in July 1981, Columbia would fly on STS-18, carrying a Space Lab pallet and a DoD payload.
Oh, the fun, spicy, secret kind.
Yep. And then STS-19 would be also Columbia in September 1981, where it would carry 5 Space Lab pallets.
So what is a Space Lab pallet supposed to be?
So you can see here, kind of, this is deploying satellites. So it'd be something like, so you can see that right there. I'm circling it. So the pallet would be about that big.
Okay.
Right? And you put science experiments on it. And that'd be a pallet.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's just a bunch of science experiments packed in.
Yeah. Packed together. Yeah. And this one, I think, is concept art of the shuttle deploying a GPS satellite. So these are the upper stages to deploy it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. There's another one getting ready to launch. There's a remote manipulator arm, probably just taking it to, throw it away. Oh, and that's an IUS carrying more satellites. This one's carrying a lot.
Yeah. Busy mission.
Yeah. So then STS-20 would be Enterprise, carrying both a pressurized and unpressurized Space Lab pallet. So mixed there.
Okay.
STS-21 would fly in October 1981. It would carry the first instance of the OMS kit, which is pretty much extra propellant tanks for the orbital maneuvering system, these guys.
Okay.
Because the propellant tanks are actually right there for OMS, and it has about 300 meters a second of delta V.
Oh, so it's basically just like little maneuvers, not anything serious.
Yeah, pretty much it's squirt it to insert into orbit, keep it, and do some maneuvering, and then bring it out of orbit.
Got it.
Plus margins, of course. This would need 500 meters a second of delta V to get up to the Solar Maximum mission, which had failed after launch.
Oh.
Yep. And this did happen. We did send up a shuttle to go fix it.
Ah.
Yeah.
Nice.
So then STS-22 would be another flight of Enterprise in November of 1981. This would be an ESA-sponsored Space Lab mission. So I guess we'd have a bunch of, ESA astronauts going on there doing, European things in metric.
Yeah. And then the American pilots would be making fun of them.
Yeah.
And talking in very strong Southern accents. Like,
absolutely.
What y'all doing back there?
Yeah. Y'all doing that science? We'll go wrestle a gator later.
Come from Florida. You should check it out.
Yeah. Yep, go fight some gators. Go watch some NASCAR when we come back. Wear a little straw hat, get some sunglasses.
Best not be making fun of me back there.
My wife,
right around.
Yeah, we'll turn it right around. I'll call my wife Betsy. Get her out of the trailer park. Get all my trailer park buddies. We're gonna beat you up. Send you back to your country, just like we did the first time. So then STS-23.
Should probably cut a little bit of that.
No, we're not gonna cut that at all. So STS-23 Columbia would fly in January of 1982 and deploy the Jupiter Orbiter and Probe, also known as the Galileo mission, which would use 3 inertial upper stages to go to Jupiter.
Oh, wow.
Yes, so it looks something like this.
Oh.
Yeah.
Huh.
Oh, and it's not inertial upper stage. At this time, it's the interim upper stage.
Okay, what's the difference?
Interim meant that they were to build Centaur, and then Centaur didn't happen, so interim doesn't make any sense anymore, so they changed it.
And what did they change it back to? Or what did they change it to?
Inertial upper stage.
And what do they use for that?
So that's this guy. Well, actually, one of the next slides has a picture of it. We'll talk
Okay.
about that. So, the Space Shuttle is actually built and flown on April 12th, 1981, which is, hey, really, the anniversary is really close to now, which is also the 20th anniversary of Yuri Gagarin's first flight into space.
Jeez. So in 20 years, we went from the Soviets sending one guy wearing the spacecraft up into orbit
Yep.
to building and flying the space shuttle.
It's a lot of development. Very short period of time.
Yeah. Dang.
So here's some pictures of the Space Shuttle. So this is Enterprise doing some flight tests, the ATL flights, I think they're called. So you have Fred Hayes, Ken Mattingly, a few others flying this thing. So they carry up on a 747. This is to test the aerodynamic qualities of the Space Shuttle, so they could glide it in and land it. So 747 will just drop away, then the shuttle will glide into Edwards. The next picture is the external tank test article going in for vibration testing. I think this is at Marshall.
Gotta test them vibes.
Yeah. And then this is Enterprise rolling out for pad fit checks at Kennedy.
What do the pad fit checks do? Just to see if it fits in the path?
Yeah, pretty much make sure it all lines up. The arms reach out to the right spots, right? See if there's anything that doesn't line up properly or breaks, right? Without using real hardware.
Got it. So in case something does break, it doesn't cost the taxpayer $100 million $1980.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, it's. Yeah.
Got it.
So then, there are some space shuttle missions after STS-1, but before Challenger that were canceled. Obviously, there were a lot of space shuttle missions canceled after Challenger, but that's for another time.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one that's recorded is STS-10, flying on Challenger in November 1983. Now, a lot of these can be summed up as the IUS was temperamental. So it was a DoD mission that was going to launch a DoD satellite to geostationary orbit, probably. That was eventually became STS-51C later on.
Okay.
The crew would be Ken Mattingly, some guy named Shriver, Ellison Onizuka. I didn't write down all the names because this is just kind of the missions that were canceled, not all the names.
Right.
It would become STS-51C, but it was also going to be STS-41E. But the IUS, this guy right here, had a lot of problems in development.
Oh.
So the interim upper stage is actually a 2-stage vehicle meant to carry payloads to geostationary orbit from the Space Shuttle payload bay. So this guy, the Orbis 21 or 6 motor, would fire and push the spacecraft into a geostationary transfer orbit. And then in here, this ring is the instrument module for the other Orbis motor that's in here that would have an extendable nozzle that would fire at geostationary orbit to put it into the correct orbit.
Okay, so so it'd be 2-stage. One does the first burn, then the other one does the second burn once it's reached geostationary.
And this is TDRS.
Okay.
It's folded up. It actually unfold
Right.
in geostationary orbit. It's really cool looking. Yeah. So this thing had a lot of development problems and would push a lot of missions. The first flight of it on a Titan III, it worked, but they had no telemetry for almost all of the burn.
Oh.
So
they're just firing it blind?
Yes.
That's what you want to do with your very expensive spacecraft.
Yes. It's a good sign of things. So then STS-12, the first flight of Discovery, would have happened in March 1984.
Okay.
It would carry up TDRS like this, but the IUS was still having problems, so it was moved to STS-14 STS-41D. The interesting crew would have been Mike Mullane, R.M. Mullane. That's the guy who's I've read the autobiography, which is signed for somebody else.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Got a signed copy that I bought at a bookstore.
Yes. Then J.A. Resnick is Judy Resnick, one of the first women in space.
Oh, cool.
Yep. So the next flight would be STS-41F, which would be Discovery. That would launch in August 1984. Now, Discovery had an issue on its first attempt at launch where the engines turned on and then turned off.
The Space Shuttle main engines?
Yes. Yep. And there
Why
might have
did
been
they do that?
I can't remember the specifics of it. We'll talk about that when we do STS-41D. But it was something was wrong with I think it was the turbo machinery or something along those lines. And the big problem with it was they thought there was a hydrogen fire on the pad.
Oh.
Now here's a fun fact for you. Hydrogen burns invisible.
So you have no way of like visually looking out there to see if there's the fire.
Yes. The biggest fear was that the crew would try to get out of the shuttle and escape, and they'd burn to death because they'd open the door and catch fire.
Oh.
Because they wouldn't be able to tell if the stack was on fire or not.
Oh,
It wasn't.
man.
But there was a lot of issues, so they had to roll back and destack the shuttle to fix it.
Jeez.
So this canned STS-41F.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah. So this is just inertial upper stage. I think this is STS-43. Oh, and just so we're clear, the nomenclature, after STS-9, they changed how they labeled space shuttle missions to be more confusing.
Okay.
So for STS-41F, so the 4 meant it was going to launch in 1984 fiscal year.
Okay.
The 1 meant it was going to launch from Kennedy Space Center.
Okay.
And the F meant it was what letter is F? The 6th one?
Yep.
The 6th planned mission of that time.
Okay.
Yes.
So they made it confusing because why not?
Yeah. It made a lot of confusion once they stopped doing that because we had an STS-41 after. So, we'll cover that more. There was going to be an STS-62A that was going to launch out of Vandenberg. The 2 was Vandenberg.
Okay.
Yeah. And the plan after the 1980s for the 1990s would be STS-141, right? So it was 1994, it'd be 141.
140. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's just adding that 1.
And then a
the
2,
90s.
and a 3, and then...
Okay.
Yeah. It never got that far. They stopped doing that.
Yeah.
So then there's some other ones that were canceled. So they have STS-51 on Challenger in March 1985. This one was going to deploy TDRS B, but guess what didn't work?
The IUS.
Yep. This would become STS-51D and 51G. It was split apart. So the most notable crew member would be Senator Jake Garn on that flight.
Oh.
He is one of 3 senators who have been to space.
Wow.
Him, Bill Nelson, and John Glenn.
Oh.
Yep. So then we have STS-51D on Discovery in March 1985. This would deploy a SYNCOM satellite and retrieve the Long Duration Exposure Facility. This guy. That's it.
Okay.
Yep. This one was canceled because of scheduling issues and became STS-51G. Now, the problem is you wanted to have Bill Nelson fly on 51G. So what they did was they bumped Greg Jarvis off and put him on STS-51L,
Okay.
which he died on,
Oh.
because that's Challenger.
Oh.
Yes. Yeah. Also, John Fabian, J.M. Fabian, we've met him.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, we have.
Oh.
Yep. And then the last one is STS-51H on Atlantis, flying in November 1985. This one was going to be a Space Lab mission, but they decided to combine it with another one as STS-61K, which was obviously canceled.
Got it.
Yep. Interestingly enough, so VD Brand, that's Vance Brand, he flew on Apollo-Soyuz test project. He's an Apollo astronaut. And then OK Garriott, that's Owen Garriott, he flew up on Skylab.
Huh.
Yeah.
So these kind of like bringing back
Yeah.
some more of those guys. Okay.
Yeah, some of the old guys, right? STS-1 was John Young and Bob Crippen. Bob Crippen was MOL, and John Young, of course, flew in Gemini Apollo. He walked on the moon. He's one of the best astronauts ever.
Dang.
Yeah. So this and that. Is there a Space Lab palette? No, there's not. This mission. So this was LDEF was launched. This is it being launched. It was supposed to be recovered before Challenger, obviously, but that didn't happen.
Yeah.
It's actually going to fall out of orbit when we recovered it. So, yeah.
Give it enough time, it all comes back down.
Yeah, because it's in a low. Because these are really low orbits. They'd come down.
Skimming the clouds.
Yeah. So those are canceled space shuttle missions before Challenger.
Huh.
We did it. The first episode is done. Look at that.
Wow. What a disaster. We should cancel this one.
This is, well, we're going to end this mission. So what did we learn today?
I learned that the IUS was terrible. The Titan III was very useful.
Yes.
And the shuttle seems to have been doomed from the start, but managed to success despite all of these problems.
All these setbacks, yes.
Yeah.
And we saw some good shuttle images.
Yeah.
Yeah. I found this one. I thought it was kind of funny.
they don't look too happy about it.
Yeah. They're doing wind tunnel testing of the shuttle stack.
Oh, yeah, because they didn't have computer models, because computers didn't exist back then.
Yeah. So, as a quick note on this, since we're just starting this out, this is the first episode, so formatting and some formalities. The plan right now is to do about one episode per month. The goal is to launch an episode every Monday morning. Not every on a Monday morning. Gosh, I can't speak. So that's
yeah. Original plan was to do 57 episodes per year.
Yep, that's our plan. We're scaling it back to 39.
Yeah, because Congress cut our budget to only $3.5 billion annually.
Yep. Thanks, Nixon. That crook.
I hope he gets. I hope he resigns.
Yeah, he should resign for this.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're at max when we do 9 episodes per year at this rate. And we'll have a big disaster at some point.
Yeah, that cancels both of our careers.
Yep. We'll recover, though. But we'll never be the same.
Nope. All of our ambitions will go out the window.
Yep. So, the odd episodes will be space shuttle missions. The even episodes will be space probes. Now, don't suggest us anything. We have a schedule that'll cover us to about 2 to 2.5 years from now. We're good.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, this is a first episode. We're trying this out. We're doing some fit checks, right? Doing some engine testing. So we're figuring this all out, figuring out the format. We're going to try to get Face of Sarcasm to talk more and make more jokes.
I guess, because I can't just patiently listen to you describe these things in detail.
You are not the audience.
What?
You're not the audience. We outrank them.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay, so I'm going to keep interrupting you just nonstop, asking stupid questions.
Yes. Yeah, keep asking stupid questions.
Okay.
So,
why is it orange?
The external tank?
Yes.
That's the foam. That's what it just looks like.
Oh, so why is this one white?
They painted it for thermal management. Because
Okay.
remember, that's liquid hydrogen in the tank there, which is at 20 Kelvin.
Okay.
Room temperature is about 273 Kelvin.
I'm pretty sure it's 300 Kelvin.
Close enough. Oh yeah, because 273 is 0.
Yeah,
Celsius.
that's Celsius.
That's not
That's
Florida.
when water freezes.
Yeah. So this is like 300 Kelvin.
Space is like 2 Kelvin.
Yeah. I thought it
That's
was
20 Kelvin.
Yeah. And then we have liquid oxygen up here. It's at 70 Kelvin. And it's in Florida, which is hot and humid.
The best place for cryogenics.
The ideal launch environment. So it was originally painted white for that. They did it for STS-1 and STS-2. Then they said, why are we doing this? We don't need
It'll be
paint.
fine if it's orange.
Yeah, let's leave it orange. It looks cooler.
Cool.
Yep, and then that was that. So if there's any issues, like technically like audio, I know Face of Sarcasm's mic broke because he's a peasant. Mine's working fine. We'll fix
It's
that.
the same one. It's just 3 years does a lot to a microphone, I guess.
Yeah, you left it in space for 3 years on the long duration exposure facility, and now it's now you got to bring it back. So, if there's any issues with the formatting, how fast I talk, how bad my humor is, please point them out. What's your email address so they can direct it all to you? Face of Sarcasm.
I'm not going to justify that with any sort of response.
All the hateful messages send to him, not to me. So,
please direct all of your complaints to Richard Nixon at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, whatever the White House is.
yeah, it's 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington,
Washington,
D.C.
D.C.
So, on the next episode, End of Mission, Episode 2, we're going to talk about missions that didn't work. Comet, Contour, and the 5 Artemis 1 CubeSats that did not work.
Oh, fun. Oh, so that's how they store them in there.
Yep. We'll talk about that in the next episode. You got to tune in a month when we do this again.
Yeah, assuming we're all still alive by then.
Yes. Any closing thoughts for the first episode?
I regret everything.
This was your idea.
Yeah. No, I regret nothing.
Good. Good. How would it end this?
You could just hit end record. Oh, this has been End of Mission.